I don't know, therapy changed the way I think about the acceptance of feelings and how you can, it's almost recognize them. There's a training you need into how to recognize feelings, even your own feelings. And that's really powerful when somebody opens that door for you.
Welcome to this week's episode of Great Conversations. This week, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Tris Brown. Tris is the founder and director of Northern Rose, which is a communications consultancy firm, and he was previously the chief of staff to the Mayor of Liverpool. Enjoy. Tris Brown, welcome to Great Conversations. How are you today?
Good. A little frazzled, as your listeners probably don't care, but I've had a hell of a morning and I'm bouncing around, so I'm running very behind schedule. But yeah, so a little frazzled.
But it's okay to be frazzled. Aren't we all frazzled? It's fine. Take a deep breath. You're here now. All you've got to worry about is our great conversation. So no stress. And answering the one question that my previous guest has left you. So Tris Brown, how have you changed the most over the last year?
I mean, that is a great question. I think I feel like the last 12 months have been a year of trying to actually learning a lot about myself, sometimes by accident though. And it has been a really interesting year. I left my job almost exactly a year ago. So this year has been a whole new journey of trying to find out who I am and what work do I want to do, what kind of working life do I want to have, what do I want to achieve, what do I want to create, I wrote a book, I ended up setting up my own consultancy, and all of those things have taught me things. I think I've had to learn to be more okay with myself and embrace weaknesses. Even setting up a business and a consultancy is a challenge. For anyone who's done it, they'll know it. And you kind of have to get over yourself and some of your fears.
But I'm not surprised though, because what you're talking to is a fundamental shift in your identity, which is pretty huge at the age of 48 to have undertaken this journey for 12 months of uncovering who you are. And what you want the sort of next phase of your life to look like. I'm not surprised that you could talk on this for hours, because it's a big topic to uncover. And so I would love to know, how have you gone about that journey?
12 months ago, I finished about 12 months of therapy and going to see a counsellor. And I just thought that it was great. I'm a big advocate for it. I recommend everyone do it. I really, really enjoyed it, and I got a lot out of it.
What was it that encouraged you to go and seek a therapist in the first place?
I think I just felt like I wasn't doing very well at facing the challenges I had in life, in work, in personal life. And, it just didn't feel like I was... it feels a bit glib to say I was unhappy. I don't think maybe I was unhappy, maybe I wasn't, I don't know. I think that kind of minimizes the great things that I did have in my life. But I maybe didn't think I was facing the challenges that were going on very well. And sometimes you can have one thing that isn't working particularly well in your life, like work, for example, which is, I guess, what it was for me. And then that can have a ripple effect on the rest of your life. I also, I'm kind of glossing over some of the things that some of my friends said, but my previous job as chief of staff to the mayor basically ended in a very chaotic period. The mayor was arrested. The council, there was a lot of trouble. There have been a lot of arrests, so there was a lot of drama and trauma within the council. I was always the one trying to hold it together. I worked during COVID, the hardest I'd ever worked in my life, as almost everyone in the public sector did. And so I felt kind of a bit of burnout as well. So I think, to be honest, at the so what's that? At the end of 2021, I was feeling bruised and beaten up by a lot of things, mostly in my professional life.
I think the impact of COVID and lockdown and what that represented and what we had to carry in that period is really coming to bear now. And oftentimes that happens when, as you say, we refer to trauma. I've got this definition of trauma is something that's really close to my heart, because I think oftentimes people associate it with some, big disaster. And I love a man called Dr. Bruce Perry, because he describes trauma as something that knocks your adrenal system out of whack. And I think what that means is that, trauma, it broadens the number of people that are susceptible and that carry trauma within their life. And there's this period, isn't it, where you just have to get through it. And so you dissociate. And then it's only when, I guess, things return back to quote unquote normality, your adrenal systems and your body starts to calm down and come out of that fight or flight, that you can really then start to acknowledge and face just what you've been carrying and what you've gone through. And I feel like actually a lot of people, that's coming up for them right now. I'd love to actually, and particularly as someone who identifies as a male, this idea of therapy and reaching out for help and speaking to somebody about what's going on within your brain is a huge step for a lot of people. How did you get comfortable with reaching out and asking somebody for help and then embarking on that process, the therapy process?
Looking at it from a male is something I hadn't thought about before, really. Actually, there were two men in my life who basically went, Trish, I think you get a lot out of therapy. I think before that, I just had genuinely thought, what's the point of paying someone to sit and listen to me talk? I got loads of friends who will all sit and listen to me talk, right? It's kind of like, what do I actually get out of this? What's the point of paying for it? And but it was actually two men, Jack and Mark, who went, no, well, just, they'd been through it. They'd had their own experiences. So I guess there's something about passing it on. It's almost like, for men to keep talking about it. It is interesting because I always felt I was quite an open person. I sometimes worry that I'm too open, and that ends up being like a related or part of the problem. And I grew up with with my mother, a single mother. So I was brought up by a single mother, and my grandfathers had passed away, so my grandmothers. I kind of feel like I was brought up by women, if that makes sense. My father didn't disappear, to be be totally fair to him, but he did live on the other side of the world. So there weren't as many male figures in my childhood as I guess most your typical kind of nuclear family. And I always thought that meant that I was much more open to discussing about feelings and how people felt and so on. But I don't know, therapy changed the way I think about the acceptance of feelings and how you can, it's almost recognize them. There's a training you need into how to recognize feelings, even your own feelings. And that's really powerful when somebody opens that door for you. So I guess once I'd decided to do it, it just kept working for me. So I kept going. And kept learning from it. I've also got this theory that as a 48-year-old man, and I think this applies to most, middle-aged people, we forget to go out and learn new things. Like the process of learning new things empowers and excites people. It becomes an enriching experience. And we kind of think, oh, but learning's for when you're young. But it's like, well, actually, you can enrich your life by learning. And I learned about therapy and I learned about myself.
I love how you're framing what you got out of it in terms of sort of skills and learning. You've used the words, which I really like, of not only building skills and learning even later in life, but you use the word empowering. And so I'd love to know how your journey and your relationship to understanding your emotions and giving space for them, how has that empowered you in your life since you learned how to do that?
There's something here about failure. I think that's where I jump to with this, which is that we all will fail. I will fail to embrace my emotions. I will fail to recognize whatever emotional space I found myself in at any one particular time. But the recovery is faster because you can go, oh, okay, I failed, but that's okay because we will fail. The acceptance of failure, and that enables you to kind of pick up and move on. And I do think a lot of interpersonal dynamics come from, and I'm applying this to politics as much as anything else, but even when people know they've done something wrong, they struggle to turn the lens on themselves and just go, okay, I know I did that wrong and I'm sorry, and moving on. And it can be really powerful when you do that.
It's accepting your personal responsibility for your actions, because that's the only thing that you can control. And I love how you've just framed how you apologize, because oftentimes most people don't apologize properly because it's always caveated, isn't it? Oh, I'm sorry I did X, but I was feeling stressed, or but I felt attacked when you said.
I still fail to do it properly.
But that's okay. It's having compassion around that. Sometimes we can't. And actually the power of a real apology is to simply do what you said, which is own your actions. I'm sorry that my actions upset you. That's it. That's all you have to say. I'm sorry I lost my temper and shouted. Draw the line, then, because actually what you're talking to, I think, is most of the problems of interpersonal relationships is that we project our shit onto other people, or we assume that we know their actions, or we want to control their response to things. We want their response to be how you would respond to that. And so actually there's something really empowering of exactly what you say, owning your personal role in it, taking accountability, drawing that boundary, and then moving on, not trying to then control that other person, because the only thing that we can control is ourselves and our response to situations.
It's about risk, isn't it? And do people feel it's too risky to be honest?
It's intriguing to me that you associate authenticity with risk. And one of the things that you said earlier was you spoke about how through therapy, part of your journey was accepting failure. And I would love to offer a reframe, which is just accepting your humanness and humanity. Because for me, that's what this is all tied up in, people's inability to apologize maybe, or people's inability to collaborate or ask for help. I think there's this misplaced narrative and fear that to be in control or to be competent or to be a leader, we have to have all the answers. We have to be strong, and strong means not showing any form of indecision, or, it's weak to admit what you're not good at. It's weak to ask for help. And I think that's why we often have this tension with the concept of failure. And it's all about our humanness and humanity.
Yeah. And I think that, to go back to your first question, what have I learned over the last 12 months? I think that is one of those things that I have learned, being willing to accept some failure and apologize for it. And I don't think it's just about kind of saying, being able to apologize in the proper way. I think my wife would say I still fail at that regularly, and I own that. Sorry, but because I do, because it's innately, you're in a moment, aren't you, where you're having an emotional reflex, and you're trying to step in front of that reflex, and then choose a different path. But I liken it very much to, the brain is a muscle, so it's it's very similar to kind of physical training, in the sense that your body might want to move in a certain way, and it's about being able to feel your muscles and then make a movement in a different way, whether you're lifting weights or whatever. And I think it's very similar. You train the muscle. And there was something, we were talking earlier about therapies. There was something I wanted to throw in there that you and I have had this discussion before, but we start at an early age and we are not taught how to manage our emotions very well. We grow up with a whole kind of self-education, which we just don't have. I think it's part of the humankind journey is to move to a space where we grow up with more tools to allow us to explore who we are and how we're feeling and what does that really mean. And and I think that includes that journey around self-identity and discovery. And I think that's why we are seeing more and more young people with different identities, whether it's gay, lesbian, LGBTQT. You know what I mean? They're all manifestations of people having a much healthier understanding of who they are and being able to express who they really are.
Do you think that? I don't know. I'm always really, I feel like it's a bit of a yes and. I feel like, yes, more people are encouraged to embrace their identity. And I feel that there are huge amounts of individuals, even younger, that are just lost and that are pinning identities on themselves based on what they're seeing through social media. I still think it's this, for a lot of people, it's just not a genuine identity, and it's understandable because, you feel that pressure, like no matter what age you're at. I think you do feel a pressure to conform and to fit into an environment within which you exist. And it manifests slightly differently in the generations. But I do think that it's something that's still there. I think a lot of people don't really know who they are.
I think 'twas ever thus. I think young people growing up finding themselves. I mean, social media fundamentally is a new thing that humankind is still learning how to deal with. I mean, that's the other point here, isn't it?
And I'm wondering, like, this insight that you have now, this toolkit of that you've learned through therapy, this sort of deeper insight into who you are at your core, who is Tris. If you think back to when you were younger, and it's not around regrets, but how do you think having this set of knowledge, skills, insight would have impacted your life differently if you'd had that when you were, young Tris, moving into teenage years, making decisions around life?
I think young Tris really worried about fear of missing out. We grew up very poor. So it was very evident to me that there were opportunities in life that weren't available to me because I was poor. And that created a sense of anxiety and fear of missing out in things. I think I struggled to. So there's a strange thought that I've been having over the last year, I guess, which is that I always felt different to everyone, right? I was never into sports when I was growing up. And so I didn't join in with the other lads in the football. And we lived in a very different part of the city to most of the people I went to school with. And they all had all nice, kind of, for want of a better way of putting it, middle class houses, you know what I mean? The middle class lives. We didn't. And I always felt different. And I think over the years that I don't want to say bitterness. I don't think I ever felt bitter about it, but just a real sense that there was maybe a sense of bit of unfairness. And I think sometimes, certainly in politics, people are driven by the feeling that there is a lack of fairness or inequality that you then have to go out and you have to fight to battle against that, to create opportunities and so on. And it definitely drove me around this sense of social mobility, this idea that it doesn't matter who you are or where you were born or who your parents are. you should still be able to make the most of your opportunities in life. I still believe that, but I may be more relaxed about accepting the fact that I was different to everyone else. So I think sometimes you just have to embrace the fact that it's like, yeah, okay, I am different. And then that means, I look at families, or, you look at people and you think, oh, I kind of wish I had that. I guess part of the lesson is that actually everyone looks at the grass is always greener on the other side, and everyone's looking around going, oh, I wish I had that. And it's far better to just go, yeah, okay, and shrug your shoulders rather than let that become a motivating kind of factor.
Like all of it and what you're speaking to is this acceptance piece, acceptance of yourself, of your difference, of your uniqueness, of your story, of your heritage, of your roots, and accepting that with love and compassion. And so if we can go into your story a little bit more, if you don't mind. So you grew up in Toxteth, single mum, got a scholarship, went to one of the best schools in Liverpool. What did you study at uni? What did you go on to do? Like, how did you end up 12 months ago leaving the mayor's office, having worked for 7 years as the chief of staff? Like, how the hell did you get there? Tell me about your journey.
I had a very messy kind of career path, I think is probably the short answer to that. I mean, I wanted to do law. I wanted to be an entertainment lawyer in my late teens, and I wanted to go to Hollywood, and I wanted to eventually produce and make movies. That was the dream. But as I got closer, I kind of thought law wasn't really for me, but I still had this passion for theatre and television and so on. So I went away to America. I studied in America for a year. I worked in theatre and television in America. Came home because I basically ran out of money and kind of needed to come home. Came home, and despite the fact that I had been working in television, I couldn't get a job in television because I didn't have a degree. Because, if you go back to kind of the mid-90s, you basically television and film was still a very snobby business, basically. And so it wasn't about whether you had expertise or experience. It was literally like, do you have a degree? No, then we're not interested. So I came back and I couldn't get a job. And I'd done my work experience at school in an advertising agency. And they heard that I was unemployed. So they went, oh, well, come in and work for us. So I went and worked for an advertising agency. And the boss, Trevor Leach, was basically this old-fashioned ad man. He taught me so much about communicating and how you prioritize your messaging and how what's the most important thing you need to communicate, and make sure you do that up front. And this was pre-1997 when, of course, Tony Blair won and everyone's like, hey, And so I joined the Labour Party and I went to John Moores University to study politics. I think I was drawn to politics because I talked about growing up in poverty, and I think I was drawn to politics because of a sense of powerlessness that I had about, growing up in poverty, going to a poor school, seeing kids not get the opportunities they should have had.
It's really interesting that you've shared the motivator for you to get into politics was this sense of powerlessness, and I can and social justice, and so I can assume that it was to empower others so that they didn't feel that sense of powerlessness that you did. But I am really curious, Trace. I mean, and I don't know the ins and outs of the salacious details, what's right or wrong. I'm sure it's still in the court system. But then how do you square that with the fact that the mayor that you worked for was arrested, that there's a lot of claims within the local government of stealing, of actually just not doing the job morally and ethically in the way that they were sort of elected to do so. So how did you, how have you dealt with that?
I mean, that's a good question. In truth, I've not really talked about. I mean, to separate it out, I think it is worth. I've seen Joe as the mayor go to food banks and extremely moved by the people he would meet there. He came from a ludicrously poor background himself, and he was always driven by this kind of very much similar kind of motivations as me, but to tackle poverty, to try and get to the roots of poverty. And this is why he was such an advocate for growing the Liverpool economy, because essentially his argument was, my argument still would be, that you improve the strength of the economy of Liverpool, that creates jobs, and jobs allow people to get out of poverty. And he was fiercely protective of people in Liverpool, particularly people who come from poor areas that, that he felt needed a leg up or an opportunity. And and I personally feel there were people who tried to exploit the fact that Joe always wanted to deal with them and work with them, because he almost didn't want to work with the big institutional developers, because he thought they were already successful, and he wanted to try and give a helping hand to local people trying to set up in business. The honest truth is, I don't really know. I can genuinely, honestly say nothing ever happened in front of me that I would consider questionable or illegal. And if it had, I would have called the police. So but I think, to go into your wider great conversation thing, it's there's this weird bit where I almost don't know how to talk about it, because let's face it, very few people have ever been in the situation I am in, right? This is a unique thing about me, that I have been in that environment, and then I've had my boss arrested, and I gave a very long witness statement to the police myself. I guess there was an element of trauma of it, but sometimes I have to sit back and go, well, that was a unique experience.
And I think whilst, yes, the details of your situation are unique, actually what you're talking to isn't. What you're talking to is, you built a relationship with someone, a working and personal relationship with a person and you thought they were one thing, and then something has happened, and now you're questioning who actually was that person, just as you. So it's really interesting, that now, actually, with that insight, that your answer to the question at the beginning has been around you questioning your identity this last year and figuring out who you are. It's not surprised that was sparked by, the Mayor of Liverpool being arrested, and suddenly you're questioning, well, did I know the man, and who is this man, and then all people around that. And I think that's something that a lot of people can really resonate with when you're in relationships with people and they do bad things, or they exhibit behavior that's against how you would. It shapes and it impacts, and it throws up a whole load of questions. What's the future looking like for you now? Where's that going to take you?
I don't know. I mean, by the time this podcast comes out, we will see what the next election is shaping up, and whether there's a role for me in the next election as a candidate or not.
That's really exciting, and it sounds as if the future is like, as you said before, you're building on your strengths, which is clearly listening, collaboration, the power of the community. But what's slightly different now, I'm hearing, is that your voice is front and center, and your vision and your needs and what you want is the driving force, whereas maybe in the past it wasn't there as much. That's hugely exciting. Yeah, 2024 is going to be a big year for you, I can tell. And so we have a closing tradition on this podcast, and I like to ask all of my guests. So, Tris Brown, what is something that other people value that you don't?
It sometimes shocks me how much people value being rude and unpleasant. Because the truth is, you'd want to say no one actually values that. But let's be honest with ourselves, there are people who value that. And I can't get on board with that. And that tends to trigger a reaction from me, because I think that's so wrong. So there we go. That's how I'll finish on that question.
Brilliant. See, you did it. Thank you. You did. Thank you so much for your time, Tris. Thank you for your honesty, for sharing your story. And I'm very excited to see what 2024 holds for you.
And for you, Nicola.
For any listeners who were inspired by this week's story, in particular when Tris spoke about spending some time connecting with his emotions, and you're maybe wondering how you could start on a similar journey, I just wanted to let you know that integrate.net has a whole host of free and paid for resources and tools that you can use to start your journey. So if you are inspired, I would really encourage you to go check us out. Links are in the show notes, and yeah, there's no reason that you can't get started today. As always, I want to thank my guests for their openness, Stian Moritz, Jamie Jenkin, and just want to send you all so much love. Bye for now.